Good afternoon, and welcome to Food for Thought. I'm Elizabeth Henderson, Senior Director of Enrollment and Student Services in the McCall School of Business at Queen's University of Charlotte. I'm so glad you have joined us for this much anticipated discussion on the future of the workforce and workplace as we continue to face uncertainty, even as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic. For those of you who are new to Food for Thought today, this is a virtual series that the McCall School of Business relaunched to provide tools and inspiring messages to help people and organizations navigate the impacts of the pandemic. Food for Thought features McCall School faculty and business leaders and provides a taste of the McCall School experience by covering topics often discussed in class. We offer 5 undergraduate business majors, 12 non-degree graduate certificate programs, an MBA, and this fall, we will be relaunching our Master of Science in Organization Development program, adding an emphasis on an organization's most valuable resource, its people. The program has been renamed a Master of Science in Talent and Organization Development and responds to business needs related to building talent, managing change, fostering inclusion, and creating a strategic vision that inspires others to follow. Today's Food for Thought discussion stems from the need to address these topics that are top of mind as leaders prepare for rapid transformations in the future of work. I am excited to hear our panelists discuss what they anticipate we will see on the other side of the COVID pandemic, how these changes will impact us, and how we can thrive moving forward. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Dr. John Bennett, our Director of Graduate Programs and Wayland H. Cato Chair of Leadership, to get us started and introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and welcome all of you. We're excited to be with you and talking about this critically important topic at this time. As we think about COVID-19 and the COVID-19 pandemic, they certainly have impacted all of us. And as we begin, let's take a moment to remember the more than 3 million people who have died from the virus worldwide. With more than 50% of the adult US population vaccinated and companies and organizations preparing for life after COVID, it seems appropriate for us to devote this time to think about how the pandemic has impacted our lives, our work, as well as consider what life and work post-pandemic will likely be. A recent study was reported in Envoy. The study was entitled Return to the Workplace, released in March, and it found that more than 47% of those responding said that they would likely leave their job in the scenario of having to come back to a physical location for their work. 41% said that they would be willing to take a job with a slightly lower salary if it offered a hybrid work at home or in-office model. And a majority of workers surveyed, that was 62% actually, support a vaccine mandate for in-person employees. The study found a number that was significantly higher in technology and business sectors. Many of the employees who surveyed and said that they want the power to design a work week that works best for them. And nearly 48% of those surveyed prefer returning to a hybrid model, but the number is even higher among people of color. I saw another survey that indicated that approximately 25%, 1 in 4 workers, plan to quit their jobs post-pandemic. These are significant implications for businesses and for individuals and their work. A PwC workplace survey found that 70% of workers said that they would not be able to return to work or work site if asked by their employer. And 51% of employees citing fear of getting sick as the top reason for staying at home. To help us explore the topic of how the workplace and the workforce are likely to change in the post-pandemic era, I'm joined today by 3 outstanding professionals, people who represent different roles and industries. And after introducing them, I'll ask them a few questions and engage in a conversation. So please use the question and answer function at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions, add any questions that you would like to ask, and we'll filter those and answer as many of those as we possibly can. We'll do our best to address them in this short time that we have together. We also are recording this session so that you can share it with others or replay it at a later date. So let me introduce our expert panel. First, I'll introduce Todd Cunningham. Todd joined AvidXchange here in Charlotte as their Chief People Officer in 2014 after holding various roles at Bank of America, Corning, and other companies. He is the Chief People Officer at AvidXchange, and he's certainly a valuable member also of our McCall School of Business Board of Advisors. Welcome, Todd.
Thank you, John.
Our next panel member is Lisa Gary, and Lisa is the Chief Learning Officer at Train Technologies in Davidson, North Carolina, just outside of the downtown Charlotte area. She's been with Ingersoll Rand and now Train Technologies for more than 13 years, following a 21-year career at Wachovia. She serves on our Master of Science in Talent and Organization Development Board of Advisors here at the McCall School. Welcome, Lisa. We're glad to have you. And our third panel member is Regina Wharton. Regina is the Senior Vice President and Regional Human Resource Executive at Fifth Third Bank. She's based here in Charlotte as well. Regina has been at Fifth Third for nearly 13 years, and she held senior human resource positions at Wells Fargo prior to coming to Fifth Third. She's the past president of the Women Executive of Charlotte and is currently the chair of the Board of Directors for Goodwill Industries here in Charlotte. Thank you for being here, Regina, and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So let me start, and Todd, I'll start with you with this first question, and we'll just ask each person to respond to this. Some of our questions we may not have time for everyone to respond, but I would invite all of our panel members to jump in if they have some perspective they want to share. So the first question I'll ask is, if you'd take a moment and tell us how your work has been impacted by COVID, and what have you learned from the pandemic experience? Todd, would you start us off?
Sure, John, thanks. I tell you what, I count AvidXchange as one of the more fortunate organizations. We've actually continued to grow through the pandemic, and that's primarily because our product is about automating accounts payable for companies, so how companies pay their bills. And so through the pandemic, companies have had to pay those bills remotely, and our product actually helps them do that. So we've been extremely fortunate. I know not everyone has had that experience. So it's been great.
Okay, good. And Todd, to follow up on that, is there anything in particular that you've learned or that the business has learned from this experience?
Quite a bit. I would say that the biggest thing personally, and also a number of my peers, is the power of presence. Being present fully. There's something about being on camera that really requires you to lean in and really be fully there, and that's a good thing. I mean, I think we've all returned to the spot of just how important that is, personally, but also in a virtual world.
Great. Lisa, can we turn to you with the same question in terms of how has it impacted your work and what have you learned from the pandemic experience so far?
Sure. So at Train Technologies, we are considered critical and essential because we create clean air for buildings and hospitals and schools. And then also we create the chillers that move food and actually move the vaccines. So we have been, with the exception of shutting down our operations for 2 weeks right when the pandemic hit, we have actually been increasing staff and continuing to grow and continuing to have that. So from a business perspective, we've done quite well. From a personal perspective, I think the things that I've learned, I want to kind of piggyback on where Todd was. I think being present is really important, and asking, when you ask your team members and they say, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, to actually say, hey, let's stop and ask the question and really say, how are you doing? How are you coping? And making that time and space. I think that's really, really super important. And I also think this virtual space, it really is exhausting. We need to take time and space for ourselves to get outside, away from these screens, to have an hour each day in our bodies. I think that's something that is super, super important. And the other thing that we've done, which I was so thankful we put in place in my company, was mindfulness before the pandemic. And so I always start every meeting with 2 to 5 minutes of just breathing, and it helps everybody settle in. And lastly, I would say that one thing that's been helpful is having 50-minute meetings, not hour meetings. So you can have a moment to get some water and get a snack or a bio break or whatever. So, so I think from a business and a personal perspective, there's been, some great learnings through this too.
Yeah, good. It sounds like it. And Regina, how about you at Fifth Third and your experiences?
Yeah, so very similar to Todd and Lisa. Good afternoon, everyone. Certainly Fifth Third Bank, we are essential and critical as well. That's something that we always know that, right? But during this time when everyone was focused more on their personal and survival and trying to understand what this pandemic was all about, we reminded ourselves pretty boldly that we are critical and essential. So our banking centers pretty much never closed. Those employees remained to take care of customers who needed to come in or needed to contact us. And that includes our employees as well. We also had a lot of our back office and customer service reps who were still in. And so as we've progressed over the months, we've had to remind ourselves that probably about 50% of our workforce never left.
Mm.
Yeah, they never left. So we've learned to really check in more deeply with each other. And that may not have been something we had done at the beginning of every meeting, so to speak, where we would really, really say, no, how are you doing? How is everyone? Where are you? How's your family? Getting used to hearing dogs and cats and children and seniors in the background. Understanding that people are working in different places, those who are working remote. So some remote, some in the office, just such a mixture. But the 100% virtual, I have to say, for me and some of my other colleagues has been exhausting. It really has been.
Yeah.
But overall, here we are over a year later and still here.
Yeah. Well, and I think what we're talking about is perhaps an awareness of the importance of paying attention to the people in the businesses that we're in, and taking care of that human element that is so critical to getting work done. And we probably were in a very task-oriented mode prior to the pandemic, and it's brought us back to our humanity. And I think that leads to the next question that I have for you. And I'll open this up to see who wants to take it first. And if all of you want to respond, that's fine as well. And it has to do with what I've noticed is the language that people are using as we're thinking about post-pandemic, to think of that we're going back into some version of normal. And I wonder if what we're going to go back into is a return to the normal as we knew it, or if in fact we truly do have a turning point, and that this will be a new starting point post-pandemic. And so I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are and your experiences are as you're planning for the future workforce and workplace. How will things be different, or will they be back to the way they were? Will we revert back to our old behaviors? Who wants to take that one on first?
I'll take it first. I think we're going to create a new normal, John. I really do. I don't think we'll go back. I think your survey that you started off the group saying that people do not want to go back into the office and that they would be willing to take a pay cut. That was sort of a surprising thing to hear, that that's really important to them. And at Train Technologies, we actually are talking about the future of work. And we are having each manager really determine what are the categories of jobs that we have. And we've had a big grand experiment for over a year where most people have worked from home. I mean, I know what Regina was bringing up, like the bankers have to be in the bank, right? So that those roles, you cannot say we can do those remotely. You can do a lot remotely, but not all of them can be done remotely. And so we've actually created 4 categories of of work that we're actually having every leader define. So it's fully fully remote, you can be completely like my team in learning. We've been more productive, and actually my team is now experiencing burnout because we're just so productive working virtually and not having the travel time. But hybrid role, we've been always talking about flex for your days. You can flex, some days you're in the office, some days you're not, some meetings you need to be. Then we're talking about geographic roles where you have to be, like you're a salesperson, you need to be in this geography. We're not going to pay for you to fly across the country. We need you to sell in this geography. And then the last one is on site. We're a manufacturing company, so we have people that are actually building these huge chillers or these air conditioning units, or we have service technicians that are going and fixing these things. They have to be on site and they cannot be remote. Now, are there things we can do to make their jobs easier and more flexible? Absolutely. So I think that's what we need to go to. And the other thing I think around meetings is like making sure it's inclusive, so that everybody, if you're going to be remote, have everybody remote. Don't have some, like we were always like half of us were in the room, the people on the phones were forgotten. So I think that whole piece around how we're going to work together in this new technology is something leaders really need to be talking about with their teams and making sure we have the skills to do it.
I'll jump in because I agree with you, Lisa. Absolutely, we are not going back. And even though I hear people all the time referring to back to normal, I can't wait until we get back to normal. I don't think we can ever go back. So I think we are forever changed. I think we are probably into a whole new awareness around the future of work. As you described, we have a similar scenario going on at Fifth Third Bank where we are studying the future of work. Probably all of us are as well. And it's just going to be different, but interesting, some of the nuances. So we're adjusting to people being in different places, some remote, some in the office. So meetings may not be, there may be a group of people meeting in the conference room and then they'll pull up on the screen those who are calling in or dialing in from WebEx or wherever they might be. So we're prepared to have a mix and to be kinder and gentler about that. I think we will have more flexibility around visiting with clients, probably more going to them than them coming to us in many cases, which will be different. Meeting at, it'll be certainly appropriate to meet in a number of different places. Let's meet on a patio, let's meet on a rooftop, so I think the whole future of work will be out and about.
Yeah, I do think that's one thing that, Regina, when you think about collaborative spaces, I know I'm meeting with our real estate folks about having learning and collaborative spaces where you may not have a dedicated office space, but you have spaces where teams can come together and be creative and collaborate and solve problems. And we need more of that, not less. In the new
hey, if I can maybe offer a slightly opposing view, it's similar in the fact that I agree it's not going to be a return to the old, and so we're prepared for a hybrid environment, much like I've heard the group say. But I got to tell you, I'm sensing and hearing from a lot of teammates that are eager to come back, and they really miss that engagement. We started volunteers back, believe it or not, in early Q3 of last year. And each month we get more and more volunteers back. Right now in the building I'm in, I'm actually here. We have roughly 150 people that are volunteered to be back. Now, being back is different, right? I'm sure at your places too. But I don't know. I don't know that it's going to be as extreme as some of the surveys and some of the, estimations have been. We'll see. And we're certainly prepared to the fact that it's not going to be the same. That's for sure. And I think I hear everyone saying that for sure.
This relates to a question or a statement that Lisa, you made, and I want to ask, how are you dealing with inclusion? This is certainly a topic, and we think about inclusion in many ways. and the challenge of being inclusive in a virtual environment that tends to be more of transactional and the back and forth, one person speaking and those kinds of things. But we also think about inclusion from a diversity perspective as well. And we've seen the technology challenges creating divisions. We've seen the need to be more relational and more collaborative in a higher tech world. So I'm curious if any of you have some success stories or even some plans, and maybe you even have a success story that wasn't so successful that you're willing to share, where you've learned something, you've tried something in this environment to make sure that people are being included. And Lisa, your example of having people in person and not in person, not on the virtual platform at the same time, has created some divide. So what are your experiences related to getting more inclusive and collaborative environments, workplace?
Hey, John, I'll offer a couple of thoughts. It definitely has been an issue. We've learned a lot over time, and we still are looking for ways to improve. Two things we've done. One, we saw right away kind of the social mobility issues and challenges. Some teammates had offices and equipment that would serve them well. Others did not. So we leaned in pretty strongly around setting up dual monitors for whoever needed it. And we're preparing to do that at work as well, so they have them at home as well as at work. Not everyone had a laptop, so we supplied and purchased laptops that we hadn't in the past. The second area is parents. And so there's been a real challenge for parents. And so we created a group of parents who began to get together on a regular basis and bring more people in to talk about what daycare and services are opening up early versus others, and how are you getting past some of the issues with homeschooling. So those are a couple of things we've tried to do to try to make sure that everyone is able to be their best and realize their full potential even in this environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anybody else want to pick up on that?
Yeah, so I'll jump in and add a couple other things, and that has to do with taking flexibility a little bit deeper to help managers, especially, to understand that you can't work like you normally worked.
Mm.
It can be impossible for that, and that's a sort of a paradigm shift with how you're managing your employees. And can't you keep your children quiet? Or do you really have your child sitting on your lap? Or is your dog going to bark one more time? And I said that earlier, and I want to kind of go back to it, because we now are used to, you talk about being inclusive, now you're being inclusive of everyone in their lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And that really critical. But I have to tell you that when I think of inclusion, I also have to think about the work that our Executive Diversity Leadership Council, we call them our EDLC, began. And that being around accelerated racial equality, equity, and inclusion. So clearly, especially today, coming off of the verdict with the Chauvin trial, and that running parallel with the pandemic. So the murder of George Floyd at the same time that the pandemic hit, caused us at Fifth Third to really think about our environment. And what we enacted had a lot to do with listening sessions. So let's talk. Let's talk, everybody. Even though it may have been based on our business resource groups, we wanted to invite everyone in to just share what they were feeling. And again, through the pandemic, through the racial injustice going on, all of it at the same time. And I can certainly go into more detail, but as you can imagine, it's been a lot.
Yeah, Regina, I'll build on that a little bit. At Train Technologies, we've had for several years what we call bridging connections, and we've done them because it's a global company. We've been doing them virtually. So I think we were more apt to deliver things virtually and have people join. And it actually started back when it was a local in Charlotte where the white police officer shot the African American. So you guys may remember that story if you've been in this area, and I know you guys have been for a bit of time. And we had people on the phone and we had people in a big showcase. And so from there started a lot of good conversations that we had. So we've been in this dialogue for a bit of time, which has helped, I think, during this pandemic to have that trusting, safe place. And then we had the CEO Day of Understanding where Mike Lamach, our CEO, spoke. We had over 3,000 of our employees on that call. And he was just very open and talked about his learning as a white male. And I literally was very, very emotionally impacted. I know a lot of people were just by the senior most position of power talking through what was happening in the marketplace. And then the last thing that I would say that we've done just about people feeling included, I think the socioeconomic piece has been a huge impact on folks. We have a lot of hourly workers in half our population is hourly and half is salary. And we're not a very big company. We're about 35,000 employees globally. But we created, and this has been going on for many years too, but we created it's called a Helping Hand Fund. And we donated as employees $1.7 million into this fund and supported, and over 80% of those requests that were funded were COVID relief help for people. And, you know, I think about people that are needing daycare or childcare, trying to keep their jobs, trying to do that, just the emotional impact and toll on that. I think that's been some of the conversations that I know our leaders have been having about how do we make sure we care for people. And even when the pandemic hit, we shut the operations down for 2 weeks, you know, because it's, you know, just so that we could get everything reset and manufacturing could come back online in a safe way. So I think people first is really what companies need to start with, and then have those deep conversations around inclusion, making sure that you're aware of impact, whether it's gender, race, sexual orientation, or socioeconomic status. I think it's really, really important.
There's so much in what you've just shared. I could just pick 2 or 3 different topics and we could go in different directions. And it's kind of like being at the wonderful buffet with so many choices. And one thing I want to pick up on is the statistics tell us that people of color have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. And one of the challenges that I know companies have is not only recruiting and engaging and retaining a diverse workforce, but there's also the challenge that companies have of what is your social responsibility outside of the business bottom line kinds of expectations. And so I'm interested if any of you have some experience or ideas about how that particular population group, people of color, in their disproportionate impact, can be supported in an appropriate way by your companies and by companies in general. What are your thoughts about that? That's a tough question, I know.
It's a tough question. I'll jump in and just say that, Lisa, I appreciated you mentioning your CEO really chiming in well on this topic, and so did ours. Greg is very forthright and shared his thoughts in writing as well as on video, as well as engaging in those listening sessions and Let's Talk sessions that I referred to. We, you know, at Fifth Third, prior to the pandemic, we were already highly engaged in community involvement, because it really does take that. How do we become one with the community? Because we really are the community. Our employees are members of the community. And in some cases, our employees may be some of those that are disproportionately impacted. You know, I'll share the whole vaccine piece around it and the hesitancy in some cases of people of color to have the vaccine for a variety of different reasons. So we took it upon ourselves to include in some of those listening sessions information to help our employees make the decisions that are best and right for them. But in addition to that, it really does take money. It takes money invested into our communities. And we just delivered on our promise of 41.6 billion in lending and investments over the past 3 years. So that was a commitment that we made to the community, and we just delivered on that promise. It was a component of some of our financial goals, and we stand really proud of that. So it takes money. It takes money to commit.
Yeah, Regina, I think it's money and action, right? Money and active leadership. And I was thinking about for Train Technologies, we actually are working with the Urban League to create sponsorships to hire minority technicians. You can make a great living being a technician working on these very technical pieces of equipment. And we realized we had to market and communicate that job path is out there. So we're actually going into the high schools now, working with the community colleges, and we've signed the 110 Coalition to hire 1 million African Americans. So I think that's where you need leadership, and you need companies like the ones on this call that are going to actually commit dollars and actions to make a difference. You know, we'll be 10 years coming out of this with all the job loss that's happened with this pandemic, right? So it's going to take all of the companies to play that social enterprise to make a difference. The government's not going to be able to do it, all of it anyway.
Yeah. So let me pivot the conversation a little bit. And we have about 200 people, by the way, on this webinar, which is a tremendous response. And we've gotten a number of questions that have come in, and I would invite anyone who wants to add a question to please type us a question in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. And I want to pivot to the topic of high potential talent and how in the pandemic you have looked at developing talent and thinking about the kinds of talent that will be needed post-pandemic. So how do you feel that pipeline? How are you feeling that now? How do you anticipate that pipeline needing to change, or the process to develop high potential talent, particularly key leadership talent going forward? So anybody have some words of wisdom about talent development long term?
Yeah, I'll jump in, John, just to share a few thoughts. You know, one of the things is how do the key competencies and what we need out of our top talent, how is that going to shift? And in particular, the whole notion of resilience, you know, grit, tenacity, just the ability to be able to flex to, you know, something as crazy as a pandemic, certainly has elevated itself on our list of core competencies. So there's the what do we want to focus on? The how for us, you know, one of the things we've learned quickly is that we've now got to do everything 2x. So when it comes to a team of HR people developing a leadership development program, you know, we're going to have a virtual program. We're going to have an in-person program one day when we have both of those audiences. And we've got our HiPos playing a key role virtually, doing virtual mentoring and also doing virtual teach-back sessions. And so that's how we've tried to get our high potentials engaged, get them, you know, engaging virtually. And, you know, we'll look to do that actually in person as well once we're able to do those kinds of things more frequently. But those are a couple thoughts on our side.
In the midst of job loss, there's also competition. And so we are in a war for talent. It may not seem like it to some, but we have positions available that we're finding hard to fill, especially when we're looking for top talent and looking for diverse talent. It's those high potential talents. But we have our talent review process that we've had in place for many years, and it works pretty well. You identify individuals, you make sure that you have a really good development plan for those individuals. And probably what's most important is that you engage them in what they want their future to be. Now, this year with the pandemic, that's probably been even more challenging because someone may say, I don't know if I want to do this work anymore. Or if this position is not 100% remote, I don't know if I'm interested in it anymore. Or I want to have all kinds of flexibility so that I can be here some days, not here some days, maybe have some other vested interests. Engaging top talent, those high potentials in this day and age right now, and the future of work is going to be quite different.
Any hints as to how you see it being different? What's that difference going to be?
Yeah, that's so definitely agile, and some may have thought that they were before. Definitely having some very highly skilled technology competencies, very open to learning something different, getting out of any kind of traditional mode that they may have been in before and being open to change. So transformational change, here we go again. We've been there before, but we're there again. And then I would add inclusion. I would say we may have stayed on the surface in the past, and now we need to know, how do we engage differences? How can we have good conversations and agree to disagree? If necessary. Hopefully we'll have conversations where we agree as well. But if we have places where we don't agree, then can we engage each other? Because otherwise, how do we really build trust in this new environment?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we know that the relationship is so critical to building trust, and that's so critical to building teams and having collaborative environments. And I think we've had to learn that we can do that in this virtual environment. And I've thought about, particularly as we are educating students in our Masters in Talent and Organization Development, is this environment has prompted many of the tools that we have used and developed and gotten really skilled at to work in person in organizations. We've had to adapt them to a virtual environment. We've not thought about doing all of our leadership development and stretch assignments and so forth in this environment, or doing group interventions or building culture in a virtual environment. We've done all of that work for so long, primarily, not exclusively, but primarily in the in-person environment. So, and how do we adapt new skills and new competencies and new approaches to doing this work, not only in the context of virtual environment, but perhaps new challenges of being in the virtual environment as well. So I don't have an answer to that, but it certainly is a challenge that I know we're facing as we're preparing graduates to do the kind of work that they do. And Lisa, I'm seeing you smile. This is your world. Do you have some thoughts on that? Yeah.
Well, I do think, and it's interesting because I think that's probably one of the biggest conversations we're having about, because the culture, it's so important for your culture to be intentional about that culture and not leave it to chance. And so it's been interesting. I've had some conversations with some senior leaders at our company where they've said, oh, I want everybody to come back. I want everybody in person. And and so back to where we were talking earlier about, just want to go back to normal.
Yeah.
And we know we're not going to go back to where we were normal. So I do think those skills of how do you make sure that you're being inclusive, that if you are going to have a hybrid meeting where you get some in person and some off, How do you make sure everybody's voices are heard? I think empathy skills. I call them durable skills. I think companies that are really investing in developing their leaders are the ones that are going to win. And Regina talked about the war for talent. I do think that's going to be a differentiator for the companies that are investing in their talent, and they know that they're going to come, because that's really the only contract we can offer, right? Is that you're going to come and you're going to get skills and you're going to learn and you're going to put those feathers in your cap because you have those skills and capabilities. And so I don't know that I have the whole answer, John, right? Because that's a big topic, but I do think that being intentional about the culture and not just leaving that to chance is really, really important for companies to really talk about that.
Yeah. Todd, I
The
saw you
pandemic
coming
has
on.
people.
Yeah, you can do it virtually. You can have those conversations virtually. I mean, that's the thing. You have to really force yourself. Why are we coming in person? Why are we spending an hour in our car to drive over, to then meet for an hour, to then drive back? I mean, it's so I just think we have to really start asking ourselves what really needs to be in person in these knowledge worker fields that most of us are in.
That's exactly where I was going, Lisa. I was thinking that the new employee-employer contract is changing.
Mm-hmm.
And a year is a long time for those who work remote, and even those who were in the office and had less traffic and all those kinds of things as well. They've had a good amount of time to rethink their lives. And we're seeing a lot of that. Lifestyle changes. I want to be home and have dinner with my family. When I'm commuting, that doesn't happen quite the same way, or it's happening earlier, let's say. Can I go to a company that is going to allow me to have that, or not? So it really is a new world order.
A new contract, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, what strikes me is that 14 months ago, we were looking at an unemployment rate in the country that was at a 50-year low. And I imagine, I know Avid Exchange experienced that. I would imagine all of you experienced that. So one of the things that keeps me up at night is, I think we are going to see a return to a really hot war on talent, like was said earlier. And there are new desires, new expectations that come with that from folks that are looking for, employment. So if there's one thing that I worry most about as we hopefully are nearing, a return to a new normal, it's that.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the questions, and I'm trying to build in some of our questions that are coming in as I'm asking these. So for those of you that are asking questions, I'm hoping I'm getting to at least some of them as we're proceeding here. But one that has come through is, how do you avoid making it a disadvantage to be remote in a hybrid workplace? And I know that many companies a few years ago had really pushed the virtual work environment and then retracted on that. I think Yahoo was one of the, which kind of was always surprising to me, a technology company that rescinded some of that remote work, and others have done the same kind of thing. And now we've been in primarily a remote mode for many workers. So what are your thoughts as you think about organizations making sure that they're not disadvantaging the hybrid worker that's not having that face-to-face interface, and what can employees do to also make sure that they're not being disadvantaged by the choices they're making of perhaps working remotely? So,
one thing that I would say, John, is I do, and I've been thinking a lot about this because we have leaders that came together. They come together once a year. We would always come together in person. The leaders loved it. We would put that on. It was a leadership development annual thing. And then we shifted immediately to virtual. Well, we're really now saying we need to shift it. Once a year, teams need to come together and see each other, be together. We're human beings. I think that is an important thing, that we'll need to have places where we come and build trust and build those relationships. And I think, and especially I've talked, we've onboarded a lot of new people, and they're like, Lisa, it's taken me forever. I don't know how to, so those are the things that I think we still need to make sure there's that human interaction. And I think companies need to make intentional choices around that. So I think that's still important. And then for people that are remote, I would say it's really important to make sure that they continue to have their network. You know, I even think about, I used to get my work done by running into people, and now I have to think, okay, I remember that person. Let me IM and get on their, you know, but now you have to sort of get on their calendar. You can't just pop into them in the cafeteria or whatever, at least. So I think that's a piece where people are gonna have to just be even more intentional about their sort of, we call it standard work, sort of how are they gonna operate so that we make sure that no one's being left out, left behind. And then I think it's on us as employees, though, to do that too, to make sure that their stakeholders, they're managing their relationships, they're building those relationships. I think that's super important to take time to do that.
Yeah. Other thoughts on how to not be disadvantaged if you're a hybrid or virtual employee working virtually?
Yeah.
I'll be a little controversial and say, you know, we committed last March with our teammates several commitments to them. And one of them was to provide clarity wherever we could in the face of a world that seems to have nothing to do with clarity or certainty. And so one of the things I think is it's a fact is to really be able to perform, I think, of some leadership roles. And so I think teammates are going to have a new decision to be made as they progress through their career, you know, around, you know, what they value most and where they want to go from a career standpoint. But I think that it's important to also, you know, level on that side of it as well and be open, talk about that, engage about that. Because there is some truth behind some of the fact that some roles need to be actually present in the workplace.
I think it's going to be challenging. And I hear in the question sort of some depth around, I'm choosing personally, I'm just adding to it, I'm choosing personally to be remote. My manager is supporting me on that. So here I am. How do I continue to be really engaged, and how do I make sure that it doesn't negatively impact my career? And I think that there is some concern that those individuals should have. So what I would add is building into your operating rhythms where you are in the office every now and then. So it's not 100% remote. It is planning a meeting that's in person. Figure out who your key, you know, who's top of your list, your top 10 or so people that you need to make sure you stay in touch with, and meet them in person. I just said that to someone today. I said, come into the office and meet with me. And she said that she would. So I think it's not an all or none. I think you have to have a combination.
Yeah. So we're running towards the end of our time, and I want to end with two questions to each of you. And the first part of this is in answer them in the order you wish here. But one question is there anything that you haven't had a chance to share that you think is important for this audience to hear from you related to our response to the workplace and the workforce post-pandemic? And then the second is a question that I love to ask people is, what are you reading or have you recently read that you would recommend? Is there a book or is there a webcast or something that you would recommend that we pay attention to? So if you can do both of those questions, anything that you wanted to share and a recommendation as we're wrapping up here in the last few minutes. So we started with Todd, and I'd like to this time start with Regina. So Regina, we'll give you the first last words.
Yeah, no, thank you. And it's been great to be here. So what I didn't get to share, or maybe didn't share as well, is the pride that I have in our company for embracing diversity and inclusion. With the executive team that I mentioned and the work that we're doing, which primarily is focusing on Black employees, by the way, because Black employees are disproportionately impacted in our society today. So I'm really proud of that work. We have some work streams going on. We've just going deep dive into that work. And that is definitely a requirement. So our leadership team has stepped up. The other part of that is really our community commitment. I said it was a 3-year pledge. It actually was a 5-year pledge that we made in collaboration with the National Community Reinvestment Coalition to help low and moderate income or high minority communities in the states where we have banking centers. So I'm really proud of that we delivered on that 41.6 billion in lending and investments. So we're helping customers, we're helping community all in one. And it as Lisa mentioned, it takes that action. And we have that. We're so aligned with community involvement, and that's a really pride point for us with our employees. I think it's something that attracts employees to Fifth Third Bank is the fact that they will have an opportunity to work in the community. And then what am I reading? I have to tell you, I read a lot of HR stuff. So I have not read a book that I can recommend in terms of this forum because I decided to read a number of personal books because this pandemic gave me a chance to get some reading in. But HR Magazine, I don't miss it. And so if anyone does have a chance to pick up HR Magazine, there's a lot of information in there about the future workforce and work in 2025, in fact, if you want to take yourself out that far. It's been great to be here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And Lisa, how about if we go to you next?
So I think I've shared this, but I'll repeat because I think the technology is becoming so pervasive and so amazing, and I think we have to really ask ourselves what needs to be in person, what truly needs to be in person if you're getting the higher order trust and you're getting relationship building and you're getting, so the things that you need absolutely come together in person. The rest, I think we can do a lot virtually. And I think that is what's going to, I think that change is going to happen so fast. It already has happened because of the pandemic and we're staying safe, but it'll stay there. It'll stay a requirement back on the war for talent, or back on just people, back on just reducing greenhouse gases, which we've agreed in our company, we're gonna reduce carbon emissions by a gigaton, which is a huge amount, and we've set those goals. So I think that in-person piece, we gotta really challenge ourselves around what can be done virtually and why are we coming in person if we can save time. What I'm reading, which I think is really important, I think this pandemic, I didn't realize how much stress I was holding until I got my vaccine appointment. And like, I jumped up out of my chair and I literally, and so just, and I tracked to myself how I was feeling about the not feeling safe and I think this will be lasting vestiges of all the, and I think about Regina's workforce that has to be in person. They've been dealing with customers and all of that. So I'm reading The Fearless Organization by Amy Edmondson, and it is about psychological safety and creating a psychologically safe place. And I'm actually very excited because we're bringing her in to speak. So, so anyway, that book, I highly recommend that book. It's a great, great book.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. And Todd.
Yeah, one of the topics that I've thought a lot about recently is the idea of the corporate athlete. You know, if you think about a professional athlete, you know, it's very clear the mental and physical health they need to be in order to do what they do. And even pre-pandemic, you know, the speed with which companies move nowadays and the stress involved was, I think, beginning to shift to the similar need for a corporate athlete approach. And now with the pandemic, just the importance of wellness programs and mental well-being and physical well-being and exercise programs, we're starting to look at that through a fresh lens. And so I think that could be something worth, you know, people considering and thinking about. In terms of books, I just finished Reboot by Jerry Colonna, who's an executive coach for entrepreneurial CEOs. And really good book. He does a good, it's pretty heavy stuff, but he does a good job of making it lighter. But it's really about kind of the essence of your being as a leader, your behavior patterns, the things that make you successful, and helping you also see, though, the cost sometimes those behavior patterns have on relationships and on your well-being. And so that's a really good one that I'd recommend.
Well, I want to say thank you to all of you for being with us today. And in particular, I want to say thank you to Regina, to Lisa, and to Todd for taking time to share your valuable insights, your experiences, your wisdom, because you are seasoned professionals. You have a great deal to offer, and you've offered it so freely today. So thank you for taking time to be with us. And we've gotten a lot of questions. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to answer all of them, but this is clearly a topic of importance for so many leaders and so many HR professionals. So we're glad that all of you are able to be with us today, and I'll turn it back over to Elizabeth Henderson for some final comments.
Thank you, John, and thank you again to each of our panelists for sharing such valuable insights with us. I'm really inspired by the amount of innovation that is happening to create this new normal, and really, it sounds like build a better way of doing business. And I hope all of you who joined us today gain tools that will help you prepare for the future of work. If you want an opportunity to learn more and develop critical skills to lead organizations and people forward, I invite you to explore the variety of offerings we have in the McCall School of Business, including our undergraduate programs, an MBA, our new Master of Science in Talent and Organization Development, our graduate certificates, and our Executive Leadership Institute that offers customized consulting, coaching, and executive education programs for organizations of every size. We also hope you will save the date for our 11th annual HR Leadership Summit on Tuesday, October 12th. The summit is based on Deloitte's annual Global Human Capital Trends report, and this year's report is titled The Social Enterprise in a World Disrupted. At the summit, you'll join McCall School faculty, industry experts, and fellow HR professionals to explore how organizations can make the shift from survive to thrive, and the need to bring the human element into everything we do in an organization. If you have questions about today's session, and if you want to explore any of our other offerings, please email us at mccallschool@queens.edu. And thank you again for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful evening.